All right, let's get right into it. The playwright Oscar Wilde once had this great quip where he described a cynic as someone who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. And honestly, it's a trap a lot of investors fall into. They look at a stock ticker, see a price, and just assume that price equals value. But to be a truly informed investor, you have to know how to dig deeper than that. So today, we're setting our sights on finding the true, mathematically rigorous per share value of an asset. We're going to break down the mechanics of getting from a massive, multi-billion-dollar total firm value all the way down to the specific value of a single share. Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover the valuation funnel, adding the hidden assets, stripping away non-equity claims, navigating the options overhang, and finally, calculating that true per share value.
First up, Section 1, the valuation funnel and mapping our journey.
This funnel concept illustrates a fundamental truth of investing, and it's this. You can't just take a firm's core operating value, divide it by the number of shares, and call it a day. Honestly, doing that is a one-way ticket to catastrophic mispricing. Instead, you have to systematically widen the scope of your valuation to include things way outside the core business before radically narrowing it back down to account for debts and dilution. It's really this continuous process of building up and then stripping away. Moving to Section 2, adding the hidden assets, specifically cash and cross-holdings. We need to make sure we aren't ignoring massive amounts of value that are just hiding right in plain sight. So, a lot of amateur analysts make this really lazy mistake of looking at what's called a consolidated valuation. Basically, they mingle the interest a company earns on its cash balance directly into its core operating income. And guys, this is incredibly dangerous. Why? Well, think about it. Operating assets are risky, right? So they require a high discount rate. But cash is virtually risk-free. If you just mash them together, you end up applying the wrong discount rate and totally undervaluing the cash. The rigorous and honestly much safer approach is the separate valuation. You value the operating business strictly on its own merits. Then, at the very end, you just take the cash and marketable securities and add them right on top. It's cleaner, it's safer, and it's mathematically sound. But hey, cash isn't the only hidden asset out there. Companies often own stakes in other companies. These are called cross-holdings. When a company holds stakes in others, we have to kind of put on our forensic accountant hats and sort those cross-holdings into 3 specific buckets to strip out contaminated data. For instance, if it's a minority passive holding, the company's income statement might only show the dividends received, which completely ignores the actual value of the subsidiary's operations. On the flip side, if it's a majority active holding, the parent company consolidates 100% of the subsidiary's income, even if they only actually own 51% of it. To find the true value, you've got to surgically remove these accounting distortions, value the subsidiaries separately, and then just add the proportional stake back to the parent. Now, if you're thinking this is just a minor accounting technicality, check this out. Consider the Indian automaker Tata Motors. In a detailed valuation analysis, an absolutely incredible 42% of Tata Motors' estimated value came from its cross-holdings in other companies within the Tata Group. It didn't come from its own car manufacturing assets. Think about that. If you had ignored those cross-holdings or just trusted the consolidated accounting at face value, you literally would have missed nearly half the value of the entire company. All right, Section 3, stripping away non-equity claims. This is where our funnel really starts narrowing. So we've successfully widened the funnel, right? We've built up the total firm value by adding the operating assets, the cash, and those tricky cross-holdings. But now we have to strip away all the non-equity claims. You see, the total firm value belongs to everyone who funded the company. But as an equity investor, you only care about the slice of the pie that belongs to you. Therefore, we have to subtract the outstanding debt, the money owed to the banks and bondholders, and we also have to subtract preferred stock, which basically acts like debt because of its fixed dividend payments. Once we subtract all of that out, we are finally left with the true equity value. Which brings us to Section 4, the options overhang, or as I like to call it, navigating the maze. At this point, you might be tempted to ask this exact question. We have the equity value, we've got the share count, let's just divide them and go home, right? Well, actually, no. Doing that completely ignores a massive hidden threat to your investment, the dilution effects of management and employee stock options. Simple division fails here because of what's known as the options overhang. Imagine a company grants its CEO the right to buy millions of shares at $10, even though the stock is currently trading out in the market at $50. When the CEO inevitably exercises those options, the company is basically giving away $40 of value per share. And that value, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. It is silently drained directly away from the existing stockholders. So how do we actually account for this strain? Let's look at two methods. The fully diluted method is what most people tend to do. They just pretend all the options are exercised today and blindly add them to the total share count. But doing this artificially punishes the stock price because it completely ignores the fact that employees actually have to pay the company the strike price to get those shares. That brings cash in. The far, far superior method is the option valuation approach. This treats employee options as the actual financial instruments they are, and it uses complex formulas like the Black-Scholes model to calculate their precise real-world value.
Let's put some real numbers to this using a historical example of Cisco Systems. Cisco had a massive 732 million options outstanding at the time. Instead of just lazily adding 732 million shares to their share count, an analyst used the Black-Scholes model to find that each option was actually worth about $2.96. If you multiply that out, you get a total equity drain of $2.16 billion. Accurately valuing these options means calculating a precise deduction from the total equity. You literally subtract that $2.1 billion from the equity value before you divide by the shares.
And finally, Section 5, Calculating True Per Share Value. We have reached the destination. Having navigated the maze of options and debt, and successfully wrangling all those hidden assets, we can finally put the whole puzzle together using Exxon as a historical example here. Meticulously, we take the operating assets, which were over $320 billion. We add the cash, $32 billion. We subtract the debt, $9.4 billion. That gives us our true equity value. Then, and only then, do we divide by the correctly adjusted number of shares, roughly 4.9 billion. This really meticulous process is what gets us to the true unclouded value per share, which in this particular historical example landed at $69.43. But hold on, there is one last little nuance to remember here. Sometimes, not all shares are created equal. In a theoretical split where the core business is exactly the same, voting shares might carry an estimated value of $10.48, while non-voting shares sit a bit lower at $9.52. This premium exists because voting rights actually give you a say in management, and that becomes incredibly valuable if the company is ever targeted for a hostile takeover or a restructuring. Wow, we've covered a ton of ground today, haven't we? From the real dangers of mingling cash, to the massive distortions that cross-holdings can create, to the silent drain of the options overhang, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to challenge how you view your next investment. Do you actually know what's inside the price you're paying? The next time you look at a stock price, remember the funnel. True value isn't found in a simple middle school division problem. It's found by relentlessly hunting down every single asset and rigorously pricing every claim. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I will catch you in the next explainer.